first-time guest, someone who I've been talking with off-air now for about 30 minutes or so, and she has a lot to say concerning the New Age, perhaps who she believes is the Antichrist. But just in general, I think a good title for this episode and our initial talk here is going to be called Staging for the New Messiah. And her name is Constance Cumbey, and many of you already know her from her book, Hidden Dangers of the Rainbow, the New Age Movement and the Coming Age of Barbarianism, and also Planned Deception, a staging of the New Age Messiah. So she's an active Michigan lawyer, I think in the Wayne County area. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, Constance, when we get started here.
Okay. Wayne County, Macomb County, Washtenaw County.
Yeah, there you go.
Counties, Genesee County.
So in our initial talk here, Constance, I wanted to allow you the ability to tell the listening audience maybe just a little bit more about yourself, how you even became involved in the New Age, and then as a basis or a foundation, maybe we can just have you talk a little bit more about the New Age movement in general, maybe a short history or overview.
Sure. Okay, well, happily I was never involved in the New Age, but I did discover the New Age movement. I stumbled onto it, I thought, almost accidentally in 1981, and was frankly looking for a book I could find on it to explain the obvious that I was reading. I started noticing a trend running through books, both Christian books and non-Christian books, that just about everything was good for you but Christianity. If you were a Christian, you might be a bad earth keeper if you weren't going to take proper care of the earth. But then all the books had the Zen of this and the Zen of that, and this karma and that karma, and Eastern mysticism and Western mysticism seem to be running through it as a heavy thread. But I thought, where are they getting this stuff? And I started tracking down their sources, and when I found their sources, it was places my mother had once told me never to go. And they were using some highly occult sources. And I started suspecting that there was some things going on, but their books were talking about the reappearance of a new Christ, one they cheerfully admitted was not Jesus. And when I tracked down some of those sources, then I found to my shock that some of their prominent writers were openly praising Lucifer. And of course, you don't have to be a theological genius. I've been accused of demonizing the New Age movement, but they did a pretty good job of demonizing themselves. Let's see if I can get rid of that call.
Okay. Maybe it's the NSA calling you.
Yeah, that was. See if I can silence that while we're on here. Okay, but at any rate, I was looking for something I could read. It didn't exist. I was researching it. And the more I found, the more I looked at it, the more horrified I became. I'd been a political analyst even before I became an attorney, and was used to tracking notions and ideas to their source. And so I started collecting this material, and then I started having peers in the legal community and in the academic community look it over, and they told me my work had credence, and I ended up writing the book. Now let's see what this is. Maybe it is the NSA with a busy signal. Okay. At any rate, I stumbled onto the material, and I found it running blatantly through both Catholic and Protestant worlds. In fact, sometimes the propaganda was sharing a publisher. InterVarsity was publishing it for the Protestants, and Paulus Press was publishing it for the Catholics, using the same paper stock, the same logo, the same everything, the same material, but just a change of logo on the side of the books, different logos, I should say, not the same logo. And so I started putting it together, and first I was looking for a book that somebody else had written, and nobody had written it, and I ended up writing it. And I didn't know quite where to take it, where to go with it. I shared it with people I knew in the professional community here in the Detroit area, with friends from the political community, and shared it with some ministers, and shared it with my clients. And eventually, it just like Topsy, it kind of grew. And I had put myself on some New Age mailing lists. And in the uh, very early spring of 1982, I received a mailing that from Tara Center that they were going to run worldwide newspaper ads that would cost $18,000 to $25,000 per ad, a $500,000 ad campaign. Um, and there was a reporter at the Detroit Free Press who had been into the New Age. And I used to get angry reading her columns. And then on March 10th, 1982, she wrote a column saying Zoom, not doom, and that people should not be afraid of the syzygy, a solar event in the skies, that it might mean a new Messiah was on the way. And at that point, I just couldn't stand it anymore. And I picked up the phone, called the Free Press, asked to speak to her. And she called me back about 15 minutes later. And I said, you've written several articles on the New Age movement. She said, yes, I have. I said, how would you like to see the flip side of that movement? And anyway, she came to my office. We spent several hours going over the material. And she demanded to know why I had called her that day. And she said, knowing what you know about this, you must have become angry about my articles. I said, yes, I did. She said, I'll bet you thought of writing nasty letters to my editor. I said, yes, I did. She said, it's a good thing you didn't. I wouldn't have listened today. But anyway, finally, she told me that she had gone to the ladies' lounge of the paper, that she had gotten down flat on her face, Eastern style. She was going to pray to Buddha, and at the last minute, she changed her mind. She decided to pray to Jesus and ask him to send her revelation. And she said, now look, I have revelation. And she was on fire. And so when I received that newspaper ad solicitation, I called her and read it to her, and she called me back and said her editor said she could do a story on it if they were going to do a blitz. And then she called me back a few minutes later, just utterly disheartened, and wanted the telephone number for Tara Center in Los Angeles. I gave it to her. 15 minutes later, I received a jubilant phone call from her, and she said the advertising manager at the Free Press had gotten wind of that and said, by golly, if they were going to spend $500,000 on this campaign and $18,000 to $25,000 per ad, he would like the Detroit Free Press to have a piece of the action. So he called and gave his advertising pitch. And they told him very rudely and very abruptly that they were only going to run those ads in world-class papers. They definitely did not consider the Detroit Free Press to be a world-class paper. And of course, you know what her editors told her after that, go to it. So they ran their newspaper ads worldwide, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Jerusalem Post, you name it, major London papers all over the world. And full page ads saying that Christ is now here and that they could expect the Christ and he'd be making his day a declaration about mid-May of 1982. And 10 days later, the Detroit Free Press ran a 1.5-page story complete with pictures of the work I was doing to expose this. And my phone rang off the wall. People asked me, how do you get published? I said, you know, I don't have the foggiest. Publishers were banging on my door. But anyway, that's how we got started and how word got around big time. It used to be that 35 people would come to hear me. There was a Catholic priest who was a boyhood friend of one of my clients, and he had taken an interest in it, Father Perone from Detroit, and he gave me my first serious help. And we had the lectures every other Saturday at St. Genevieve's School Library in Livonia, Michigan. And we usually had about the same 35 to 40 people there. They would come, tape everything, make these delicious cookies, which I never got much to eat because they'd pick my brain even during the break. We'd talk for about 5 hours each time. But then the Detroit Free Press ran that, and the next time it was just packed. Hundreds and hundreds were there, and most couldn't get in. They were waiting out in the parking lot, and we had to move into the gymnasium. The library wasn't big enough. But at any rate, that's how we got started, and things kind of exploded from there. And Benjamin Krem, the radio stations asked me to do some work on it. And I was asked to debate Benjamin Creme. They were going to set it up for a Sunday night, and they didn't tell him it was the day they were going to have me on and him on. And I went to the station, the local rock station, WRIF in Detroit, for their 1 hour of Sunday night programming, public service programming. The rest of the time it was a rock station. And the mysterious thing happened. The transatlantic lines went down. And I had the whole hour to myself to explain what was happening to the Detroit audience. The station had 500 calls requesting tapes. The phone lines were jammed for the whole program. And the next week they set it up again. And this time we really did talk and debate. And I was in chills because I thought if I was taking on the Antichrist, I was facing something mighty nasty and potentially vicious. And of course, Benjamin Creme said he had heard of me all the way to London. And of course we had, it was a most interesting and disturbing program. And Trump was, he said at the end of the program he was extremely disappointed they had that woman on. And I've never really believed his London story about his Messiah was in London, because he did not come up with the London story until approximately 5 days after that debate. And then I think that they basically had to switch strategies and play it cool for a while.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Once again, I have with me Constance Cumbey. My next question for you, and I've got a lot of them. This will be, by the way, for the listening audience, the first part of probably a series of talks with Constance. We're already scheduled next month because there's just so much to talk about, truly. I wanted to get your take on the connections in your research between Freemasonry, humanism, if you will, the social justice movement, and the New Age movement, trying to kind of tie it all together. How does it all work?
Well, it's kind of an anything but Jesus movement, and they clearly want a new economic system. And they of course, they attribute a lot of what they're doing to co-masonry and Freemasonry. Basically it's an anti-God movement. And so that fits into them. Anything fits into them. Atheism fits in there. My second book, called A Planned Deception, was about some sophisticated plans the New Agers were writing about in 1981, the year before my work became publicly known, about how they were going to stage a phony second coming of Christ from the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem with enough detail to make the average Christian, Jew, and Muslim think this was their one, and that they weren't going to worry about the old age, that the mass forces of the old age would go on to defeat each other in a massive mutual venting of long pent-up aggression. But they definitely, the new economic system is intrinsic to what they're doing. Creme called his group Share International. They want it as part of a tracking system, as part of a control system. Somebody said it was the perfect control freak system, which is what they're talking about. And I think that those things are possibly coming to pass very rapidly right now.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you, to get your take furthermore on the whole emerging cashless society. I was telling people, during my media appearances last month that recently I received a bank card in which I didn't even ask for that has one of those chips in it. And they said I had to use it. Like, I had to scrap the old one. You have to use this one now. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see where this is going, ultimately, if you are a Christian. But maybe you could talk a little bit more about what you're seeing on your end, maybe cryptocurrency, the digital economy, 5G, the blockchain, lots to talk about.
And yes, worse yet, the FDA has improved the implants, and they're talking quite openly now about what should be a red flag to anybody who knows the prophecies on this, about implanting the chips in your hand. I think the propaganda started actually with our pets about 30 years ago, or 30, 35 years ago. And pet owners were encouraged to have their pets microchipped. Well, now they're encouraging us to have ourselves microchipped, and that's happening in Sweden extensively. Other countries, there are countries and companies now in the United States giving incentives to their workers to have an implanted microchip.
Yeah.
And it's one of the prophecies in scripture was those who took this broke out in these horrible sores all over their body. They longed for death, but death would not come. And I tell people, I don't think there's any advantage to you in taking this, either in this life or in the life of the world to come. Because the prophecy was those who crossed God on that one were going to see eternal damnation. And those who did take it were going to break out in these hideous sores. So there's no real advantage.
Well, there's no doubt about it. They're trying to funnel people in order to be a part of this new society, which even David Spangler, one of the heads of the UN, I forget a specific position, you might know better than me, but
He was Lorien Association, Findhorn. He spoke at the UN, was invited to speak up there, and was up there with Donald Keyes, but I don't think he ever headed the United Nations. Thank God.
Right. Well, anyway, he went on to say that no one will be able to enter into this new world without taking this Luciferian initiation. And from our perspective, that's exactly what some of the saints and the early church fathers had talked about in the Catholic Church, that ultimately this mark of the beast, in conjunction with what we already know with the implant or whatnot, will actually be a counterfeit baptism. So what I've been warning is, with this infiltration of the church, we have some of the earliest writings from the church fathers indicating that the Antichrist would drive away the Pope and basically take over Rome with his false prophet, who will rule from Rome and return everything basically to ancient paganism and put together basically this new age.
I have to confess, sometimes, some days, I've meditated greatly on Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, who I admire greatly, but popes don't quit on 2 weeks' notice.
Yeah, well, that's what I cover. That's what I cover.
I ask myself a lot of questions about that. I've wondered if some of that hadn't already happened.
Yeah, well, what we would say is that Francis is actually not a true pope. There have been anti-popes in church history who oppose a true pope. And listen, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Benedict XVI. We do believe that he contributed to the destruction in the church, and he taught a lot of these cult of man principles that stemmed.
I think he weakened on these things, and I think he was afraid. I don't know if somebody had something on him or what, but he definitely weakened. But he had originally turned Pope John Paul II around on the New Age issues. And
yeah, he was definitely staunch on that. I will say that. And, well, he's even made mention that the Catholic Church is about to go underground in his memoir. So he knows what's about to happen in Rome. And for those who are not Catholic, we believe that he is this end times pope spoken of, not only at Fatima, but in various other prophecies, who's going to flee Rome here very soon. And basically the papacy is going to be set up elsewhere. The Catholic Church is not even going to reside in Rome anymore once the false prophet takes over and the Antichrist.
Well, that was maybe the catacombs. We might all have to meet down there.
Yeah, well, that's what they want. They want Christianity to completely go underground. So my point is, in saying this, with the Second Vatican Council, we see an awful lot of the same terminology coming out of the new camp, which is highly socialistic, of course. Their term sharing is one of their buzzwords. But then they also have other buzzwords like unity and diversity. Speak on that if you would like. I know you mentioned this in your book, Hidden Dangers, the whole unity and diversity thing, but I also wanted to get your take on the environmentalist movement, which actually obviously ties in with Agenda 21 in the UN.
Yeah. Well, yes. In fact, the environmental movement, a lot of it was cooked up. It goes back some of the early transcendentalists had shades of that, and the early national park founding people were kind of agnostics and thought they could worship just outdoors and worship nature. But the serious planning got going at Aspen, which led to Stockholm. And Maurice Strong is a devotee of this whole thing. In fact, I have a picture somewhere in my collection of Maurice Strong at Findhorn, and he is the one who shepherded Agenda 21. Led the conference for the United Nations at Rio de Janeiro in June of 1995, June of 1992, the Earth Summit. And he was at Findhorn actually in a group praying with Gordon Davis and another staunch New Ager who had led the group, the expedition, praying for the soon reappearance of their New Age Christ Maitreya.
Now, if I could ask you, I know a lot of Catholics are going to want me to ask you this because we were talking off air briefly about this. You've had a lot of people come to you through your research wanting to know more, basically. And it seems like you had somewhat of a relationship with Kathleen Keating, who has been on air and basically said the same things as me. I do believe that this generic character Maitreya will be the one. I don't know what his real name's going to be, but she apparently had run into him at one point, and so much it disturbed her so much to the point where she no longer is functioning whatsoever. I mean, she has no radio show anymore. She went completely underground. I was tipped off to actually where she lives by someone who follows this show, and someone who's credible, that I believe is telling the truth. But nevertheless, she basically asked people to just leave her alone. She was that frightened by this experience in meeting this Maitreya character who just kind of vanished off into thin air, she said.
Well,
What was your relationship like? I mean, conversations. I mean, bring up anything you want to.
Kathleen would call me from time to time. She'd read my book, she'd heard my tapes, and she would call me from time to time to discuss these things. I was a little disappointed that she had gone on Art Bell's program, because Art Bell was such an ardent theosophist himself.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if he was a theosophist without much discernment, or if he had put in more than one camp, but he was just too close to the New Age and pushing too many New Age subjects himself.
I've seen that he was actually a Freemason, and that's probably why they don't want me on Coast to Coast either. I've offered to go on their show.
He was an active in New Age circles, and clearly he's followed the occult lines. And I've even mentioned, I think, in a book of his or two, I didn't even bother buying it. But anyway, now I wish I had, but I didn't at the time when I saw it in the Barnes and Noble or the border bookstore racks. But I think that this thing, we really have to stay calm on this thing no matter what. And we really have to remember that God's in charge, and that he promised never to leave us or forsake us. That was one of Jesus' specific promises to us. And that there is a prophecy, and I think it's in Jeremiah in the Old Testament. It said, "Do not say to those who say a conspiracy." It said, "Neither fear ye their fear, nor dread ye their dread. Sanctify the Lord of hosts himself, and let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. And he'll be to you a sanctuary, but to them a stumbling block." And so I said, we've got two choices. We can have God as our sanctuary, or as our stumbling block. And I'll take the sanctuary, thank you. But there's a lot of fear. This thing can lend itself to fear and hysteria. And we were warned not to go that way. So, but it sometimes does happen. And I think that's why we just really have to just pray every day for strength, that God, like he promised Moses, would be with our mouths, that the Holy Spirit remain with our spirits, and that we just really, I've had a couple of experiences myself. I've had too much happen to me to not believe. I know when I don't know if I'll share it anyway, now that you mentioned Kathleen Keating. But I went, after I was putting the pieces together and connecting the dots on the New Age movement, and I found the Alice Bailey books, and I went into the Michigan Metaphysical Society, which was a New Age shop that was in Berkeley, Michigan. And this big tall man came walking over to me, and, "Hi, I'm Sal Lewis. I'm the director here, and I just want to tell you how much I love you. I love everybody." And I said, "Sal," I said, "you wouldn't happen to be Jewish by any chance, would you?" And well, yes. And I said, "You might be very interested in some things I found in these books." And so I turned to some of the spots and said, above all, their new Messiah wasn't going to be Jewish. He said, "Well, that's correct. That's correct." And then where they were going to zap the Jews along with the Catholics and wipe out the Vatican. And anyway, I said, "So you weren't raised this way, were you?" And he said, "No." And we started having a very earnest conversation. Well, all at once the doors burst open, and the best looking man I've ever seen in my life, before or since, walked out. And anyway, Saul looked visibly shaken. And then he started, he said, "If you need an attorney, let me recommend one. Here, I just met her, she's sharp." And he said, I'm going to have her sue all the churches for me for claiming I was born in original sin. And the other fellow stood there and laughed with him, said, thanks, I have my own attorney. But then he was laughing with him. And I said, well, I'd love to oblige you, gentlemen. I said, but I'm afraid I can't, seeing I'm a Christian, and that would be a conflict of interest. As soon as I said that, the very good looking man, his face just went totally dark. And he wiped his hand down over his face very rapidly. And you're a what? I said, I'm a Christian. Well, anyway, Sal leaves the store almost immediately looking shaken. I continued browsing. The other man is up near the window looking at some things. And and then he says goodbye to Irene, the cashier. And then he turned to me and said, by the way, young lady, nice to have met you. Good luck on that book you're writing. Now, I know he could not have been in a place to have heard the conversation. And later, one of the officers of that Michigan Metaphysical Society repented of his involvement. He read my book, he contacted me, and he came out of it. It cost him his marriage. His wife, who was ardently in it, divorced him because of coming out of the occult. But he told me that Saul had many horrifying experiences that he'd recounted to him. Well, when my book came out, we had to howl because sitting up in the store, high on a shelf, not where people could see it, but where it was visible, was my book. And we kind of laughed and said, Sal's hedging his bets just in case I'm right.
Interesting. Once again, I'm here with Constance Cumbey, and title or the episode of this talk is called Staging of a New Messiah. It'll be a series of interviews with Constance, and she has a lot to offer to the table. Again, over 20 years research in this area. And the next area I'd like to talk about and get your opinion on is a more controversial figure, I guess you can say. There are some within the Christian community who think he is the real deal. Others don't seem to, they see him as being a part of this overall brotherhood of death. He, of course, has links to the Zionists, Trump himself. I wanted to get your opinion on how he fits into the equation. There are some traditional Catholics who will point out that he's a part of this Jewish end-time cult called the Chabad that it seems like Putin is also a part of. But I wanted to get your take on Trump. Is he the real deal? How does he fit in?
I don't think he's the real deal, but I do think he might be playing into some hands. And when the thing on Jerusalem, I couldn't help but remember that book I mentioned to you earlier in the conversation, The Armageddon Script by Peter Lemessurier. That was 1981, published by Pindhorn, the very place where David Spangler, who you mentioned, had given his lectures and the first published David Spangler. And it was about how they were going to stage a phony second coming of Christ from the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem with sufficient detail to make the average Christian Jew or Muslim think that this was it. And then how they were going to go on and have teachings for all the youth of the world. And they didn't have to worry about the massed forces of the old age who would go on to defeat each other with a massive mutual venting of long pen aggression. And I've kind of thought that Trump was in over his head. It's been said in that book that just came out on In Fire and Fury that he really didn't expect to win, didn't really want to win. And I think he's in over his head on this thing. But I think that certainly this is playing into their agenda because the globalists, Javier Solano, who I've expressed some concerns to you about, and the others in the global governance now community are, and they're an anti-clerical community too, by the way. But they are using Trump, Brexit, North Korea, a variety of other things, quote, climate change, which they used to call global warming. And when I first discovered them, it was a new ice age that was coming.
Right.
But they're using all these things as excuses for global governance now.
Yeah, it seems to me that the New World Order has various angles that they can take to create this unified humanity, as they call it, the new Tower of Babel. You've got the UFO card,
right.
which the UFO card we'll probably talk about in the next episode because we're kind of running out of time here. But then obviously World War III coming about, then the things that you just mentioned too as well. I wanted to just point out, in my research and just we saw what Trump said concerning Israel being the state capital. Now, what you've seen transpire since then is, Arabs on the left side forming, then you have the quote unquote Christians and Zionists lining up on the right hand side. It's playing out just like Albert Pike, 33rd degree Freemason, had said, known Luciferian, concerning World War III. But then we know from at least our perspective, again, I can only speak from a traditional Catholic perspective, that the early church fathers said that eventually the Antichrist would rule from the third temple, which is in the works. They're already talking about. I've published some videos over the past few months, Constance, where they're talking about this would be done in over the next 2 or 3 years, this third temple. So he'll eventually reign down there. And by the way, Maitreya has connections to this in what's called the New Jerusalem Project, so his hands are mixed in with that. But anyway, the whole Jerusalem situation, the Rothschilds bought out that area in the 1830s, which was just a known fact. I did a piece on this concerning the Niles County Register, which published this publicly. So the Rothschilds has their hands in that area. But anyway, my point is ultimately it's going to shift to Jerusalem being the capital of the world, as some of the early prime ministers have said. I think Ben-Gurion was one of them, that the UN, Supreme Court of Mankind would be down in Jerusalem. I mean, everything is going to be shifting down in the area. So we thought it was significant, Constance, that Trump had mentioned that. Now all of a sudden you see these nations kind of forming on both sides.
Yeah, well, certainly they're using it. How much of it is planned and how much of it is opportunistic is hard to say. Remember, the New Agers have a slogan, crisis equals opportunity. So, but they certainly are taking advantage, for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The Freemasonic slogan as well, out of chaos comes order. And so in order for this staging to come about, they need to have chaos on every level. That's why I'm expecting, and Constance can follow up on this, an economic collapse here soon. I've had all the top.
Okay. Could I comment on that? You have time?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay. Maurice Strong, the one that put together Agenda 21, also was a participant every year and a principal in the Davos World Economic Forum lectures in Switzerland, Davos, Switzerland. And he gave an interview in, I think it was probably 1995 to, no, it might have been as early as 1990. But anyway, he gave an interview. The Davos, I think, lecture started in 1971, but in 1990, there in the 90s, he gave an interview to Daniel Wood from one of the Toronto newspapers. And he he told the reporter that he'd always thought of writing a book himself, and this would be possibly the scenario. And he said every year the World Economic Forum people gather at Davos, and that the world has to have a compact to survive, to protect the environment. And the 5 richest countries in the world do not want to enter into it. And they are trying to, they try to get them to agree to it, but finally it's clear they're not going to enter into it. And so the men at Davos, some of the men at Davos, form the secret society and decide that it might be their duty to cause a collapse of the world economy to bring about this compact. And so they pull the levers on the stock market and start shuffling things so there's a decline. Now, that was brought forcibly to my mind recently. The reporter said he'd been stunned because Maurice Strong was in a position to actually bring that about. But 2 days after Trump gave his State of the Union message talking about how the economy was doing well, the stock market plunged exactly 666 points. And then on Monday, it plunged almost double that much. And it looked like it was in free fall for a few days. And I could not help but think of what Maurice Strong had said would be necessary to bring this about. And Maurice Strong's, his closeness to all the things I've been looking at. He's close to Javier Solano. He was close to the whole New Age crowd. In fact, he donated extensive real estate in Colorado for New Age groups to build headquarters, a number of which took advantage of it and built on his grounds. And he was actually in a position to do it. And he's dead now. He died not too long before Benjamin Krem and Wayne Peterson and some of the other rascals died. but his memory lives on. And they had a large tribute to him at the World Economic Forum. And I just could not help but wonder, with this thing happening 1 week after the Davos conference and only 2 days after Trump's speech, if they weren't trying to stage that.
Wow, interesting point. Yeah, a lot of interesting going things going on, but as it relates to economics, again, I've had all the top economic people on the show basically, and they're all saying it's imminent. Whether it's next week, whether it's a year from now,
Right.
it's coming, and they need to stage that ultimately to further the mark of the beast technology. But ultimately, we know that this one world republic will be socialist. I mean, when you read Share International and Matreya's page, I mean, it's quite clear that it's
Right.
it's socialistic. That's what it is. It's not. It's a watered down version of communism, basically.
Well, I've read Solano. Solano was a Marxist until Javier Solano, who we discussed off the air for a while. But Javier Solano was an ardent Marxist, and they didn't change positions until 1979, and really didn't change. I have pictures of him giving the Marxist salute at meetings in 1983. But
Yeah.
his book of Reivindicación, which is in Spanish now exclusively, but I think there's translations popping up here and there.
Yeah,
I,
that's the one I want to talk to extensively because we're at the nearly the end here, Constance. I want to give you more ample time to talk about Javier in our next show, but I've also seen him giving this 666 hand sign as well on top of the Marxist hand sign that you've indicated too as well. So he's definitely someone to be on our radar and look out for. In the next talk, what I'd like to cover, if we can, just a little bit more on the New Age movement. We'll talk a little bit more about the UFO agenda, maybe Project Bluebeam and the staging for this false messiah and all these false holographic images we're seeing in the sky. Maybe a little bit more about the Days of Lot news and immorality. Uh,
okay.
a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of stuff to discuss here, and this is the first in what I'm hoping to be a series of talks with Constance over the next upcoming months, and certainly a lot to talk about. She's got a lot of experience and knowledge in the area, and her website, by the way, is cumbey.blogspot.com. So that's cumbey.blogspot.com. And again, it's hard to imagine it's been 40 minutes already throughout this talk, Constance, but I'll give you the last minute or two to kind of close out this segment, and again, we'll pick back up in the next segment next month. We'll talk a little bit more about Solana, the New Age religion, the self-realization program, if you will, of the New Age, UFO agenda, so much to talk about. But
Absolutely. Well, Eric, I appreciate the work you're doing so very much, and that you're keeping people informed, and that more importantly, that you have the love of the truth enough to delve into these subjects and do your part. And it's something we all need to be aware of. There was a profile in Scripture of who was taken in by the Antichrist and who wasn't. The profile was never perfect truth. It was the love of the truth, and you really have to care deeply what the truth is and try to get at it. And you are assisting people in doing that, and I thank you for it.
yeah, well, I appreciate it. And like I said, I've always been a person who tries to call a spade when we see things going wrong, even from the Catholic Church perspective. I mean, just for example, Constance, I believe that Francis is a high-ranking Freemason. Given the hand signs that he's given and the doctrines that he's given, the people he runs with. I'm very open and honest about that. There are a lot of Catholics who don't like that I say that, but unfortunately, they're being deceived. They're being swayed, if you will, into this coming formalized one world religion. I just try to do my best to wake up people to that reality. But to add to your point, what you said earlier, folks, it's just being a realist. I'm not trying to be a fear monger, as I'm sure Constance isn't as well. We've got to be aware of what's going on, but we shouldn't necessarily dwell upon it. And that's the point that I wanted to make, is that, at TradCatKnight, we use this kind of symbology as an eagle, and I just say we've got to keep our wings spread in faith and hope, because we know that storm is coming, and that's the only way we're going to be able to fly above the adversity which is coming. And so an eagle is the only bird that doesn't fly from this adversity. He'll actually fly into the storm and fly above it. So we're going to have to use the crosses that Christ gives us, fly above this how do I put it, fiery trial period, if you want to say it like that, and ultimately we come out on the other side to the rainbow. So there can be no rainbow first without the storm, folks. So I appreciate Constance taking time out today out of her busy schedule, and look for our next segment later on in March, towards the end of March. And so I thank you all for tuning in to TradCatKnight Radio today. Check in at tradcatknight.blogspot.com daily. Folks, if you can, please get behind me in this information.